This video is sponsored by Vezi.
In this house. In this house.
Okay, so maybe upset isn't the word. Scary, angry, confused, lonely, triggered maybe, exhausted even. Skinamarink is the unapologetically chaotic energy we need thrown into the pop culture mix to remember that horror is purely in the eye of the beholder. Between you and I genuinely dreaded making this video because, like when I reviewed The Lighthouse, being late to the party makes it a hell of a lot harder to say anything new given the countless videos and articles looking to decipher this uncaring Canadian enigmatic mood piece by Kyle Edward Ball. As such, being the stubborn person I aim to stray away from a breakdown of what I think the film means and simply explore what it evokes, because the effectiveness of an art film like this comes from what each of us take away from it personally. In a way, Skinamarink is more of a video installation where the mood, atmosphere, and how it's projected matter more than the story itself. Watching it alone in pitch black darkness late at night is really the intended condition for something like this to truly work. However, for those looking for a quick answer to something that distinctly doesn't have an answer, I'm going to cheat by saying that I did read a theory on Reddit a few weeks back that interpreted the film as a child lost in a prolonged coma and slowly slipping away, as implied by the opening where our 4-year-old protagonist Kevin falls down the stairs while sleepwalking, and the insinuation that 527 days pass throughout the course of the runtime. If you accept this internet theory, the movie suddenly becomes a profoundly intelligent psychological metaphor for a coma, but I did not come up with it, so I'm not going to be disingenuous and pretend I have anything else to add other than it might help those understandably frustrated by the film's crypticness to better digest its particular choice of imagery. I mean, I'm with most of you on this. I want to cop out and accept this as the canon explanation, but it is complicated by how the film just sort of keeps going after what feels like a natural conclusion to double down on the notion that there is a physical violent entity stalking Kevin. As a result, I came out of it with the broad interpretation that isn't much different from the general consensus regarding themes of neglect, abandonment, and a broken family from the perspective of children who don't truly understand why their mother left before the film's events and why their dad is now absent, or is he? But I'll come back to that later using another ambiguous film to make sense of it. With all that said, if you're here looking for another explanation, this video is not for you, because there are far more impressionable videos out there, such as that of Wendigoon, who made like an hour-long video, which I haven't seen until I've made my own, but his stuff is usually super thorough and reliable, so I've left a link to that video in the description box below. However, if you want to go on a cheeky wee stream of conscious journey with me through the highs and lows this movie put me through, stick around, because in fitting form to a film like this, things are going to get more convoluted as we go along. But hey, you know what's not convoluted? This video's sponsor, Vezi. I am so shameless. Depending on where you are, weather can be annoyingly unpredictable. However, thanks to Vezi's uniquely adaptable footwear, which uses a dual climate knit material called Dymatex, you only need one pair of shoes for rain, mud, snow, scorching sand, or whatever the elements may throw at you. Vezi's remarkably lightweight, flexible, and especially breathable and distinctly waterproof design keeps my feet cool in the summer and warm in the winter, providing an all-year-round one-off investment without any hassle. As you can tell, I've been a Vezi fanboy for a few years now, as they've been the perfect companion for marshy walks with my dog, getting on with daily activities, or on nights out, enhancing my obviously dapper aesthetic. I genuinely love the look, and I'm notoriously fussy when it comes to finding nice shoes to fit my awkward feet. In fact, if you go to their website, they keep adding cool new designs like Stormburst for you adventurous hiking type, and Sunday slippers for us sensitively brittle people who just want to chill after a long, stressful week. You can see I'm an especially keen champion for their weekend sneaker, while my dad likes to use their everyday move shoe for the likes of golfing and doing all his business type stuff. So get on the Vezi train today by going to vezi.com/Ryan, pick your favorite design, and use my code for 15% off your entire order. And let me know what you think. Also, free shipping to the following places listed below. Alright, so to those who haven't seen Skinamarink, nothing I said earlier is going to make any sense, and frankly, that's exactly what it feels like watching this 100-minute experimental art house snuff film endurance test taken straight out of Sinister. Skinamarink tells the story of Kevin and his older sister Kaylee, who awaken one night to discover their father missing, as various windows, doors, and features within the house gradually distort and disappear, trapping them in an endless, disorientating nightmare where something sinister seems to be lurking just out of sight. It's seemingly framed as an analog horror, which I'm ashamed to admit is a growing subgenre I know very little about besides Nexpo, Nick Crawley, and those Fears of Fathom games that Jacksepticeye plays, but I did tell my patrons I wanted to get in on the analog action by reviewing the backrooms at some point because I hate the fact I'm severely out of the loop on this one, especially as a found footage fan. Anyway, the general vibe of the film is to condition you to feel the same string of complex emotions as the kids. It is an agonizing restless waiting game as Kevin and Kaylee explore the house to find their absent father, with the only modest beacon of comfort stemming from a television screen that projects an increasingly distorted perception of colourful children's cartoons. As the title obviously implies, Skinamarink is a childhood song that, within itself, doesn't make any sense either, thus serving as an appropriate allegory for the depressingly meaningless distraction a lot of preschool media ultimately is in evoking constant stimuli to engage the developing mind. In a sense, the title suits the somewhat abstract nature of childhood. Skinamarink doesn't actually mean anything. It's a whimsical, weird word that I thought was related to Rumpelstiltskin, which is an entirely different nightmare fairy tale altogether. Even when I think of just the emotive pronunciation of Skinamarink, all I think is, who are you, what are you, and how do I kill you? To me, it sounds evocative, but in the grand scheme of things, it's entirely harmless. Of course, naturally I'm going to sound negative because if you've ever had to babysit your niece, nephew, or much younger sibling, you probably know what it's like to endure the same unending repetition of AI-generated nursery rhyme videos, cheaply produced kids shows, and toys with batteries that never seem to fucking run out. I guess that's my cynical attempt at a unique interpretation. To hell with Skinamarink being about dark nostalgic reflections of our childhood fears, although it certainly is that. It's just as much of an indictment on how horribly empty and uncanny the things we consume are without question, never mind just childhood. I mean, besides all the vapid crap we watch online, like my videos, God help you, look at this thing. To a 2-year-old, it might temporarily sustain their attention, but the older I get, the scarier this thing becomes. In fact, 2 years ago, I was at my childhood home helping my parents pass cables through the wall, and I had to stick my hand Indiana Jones style through a dark hole, and I pulled out this thing. Yeah, I know I said creepy dolls don't scare me, but having a physical presence in front of me is a pretty different vibe completely. For me, that's what Skinamarink feels like to watch. At first, there's a tense but almost innocent charm to the stimuli that's easy to detach yourself from. Hell, there's even a curiosity to it. But the more the cycle repeats and you're subjected to the same repetitive sounds and visuals over and over and over and over and over and over again, the more it manifests into this nauseating void of torment and exhaustion. Now, for critical clarity, I don't think Skinamarink is a masterful film by any means. It definitely overstays its welcome and the tension does flatline in many places, especially since you have to think deeply to get much out of it, but in between, there are some truly powerful scenes like looking under the bed, or the faceless sister, or, I don't know, a 4-year-old gouging out his own fucking eye! I've talked before about how horror media involving children typically plays off the perception that children inherently think they're invincible, thus it's taboo to expect anything bad to happen to them. Skinamarink isn't afraid to throw its 4- and 6-year-old protagonists through fates which fiction reserve for adults, making for a surprisingly mean-spirited film, but still tasteful and subtle in execution. It almost aims to desensitize you to catch you off guard like the kids when dealing with the sleep paralysis monster thing, which I kinda thought was the father after taking the demon drink perhaps, that seems to get closer and closer as the film progresses, or rather father regresses, maybe? I'm being very loose about it because I don't want to cover the same concepts I've done before, but it's certainly called back to that time I was talking about the tulpa within the Empty Man and Boogeyman. It's a very thinking makes it so type villain, one manifested from bad thoughts and representative of what our terrified imagination can conjure. This actually only came to mind after watching Ball's YouTube short film Heck, which served as a proof of concept for Skinamarink, where the threat is presented a bit more literally by showing us a shadow casting over the home from the child protagonist's perspective. Playing off the whole Bart Simpson-esque kids don't die, there is a persistent naivety to the film's delivery, where naturally the kids are susceptible to following danger, especially when it has a commanding, curious presence. The camera work reminded me of how I would hide under my bedsheets or close my eyes when scared. The camera rarely looks towards the horror, it's actively trying to turn away in a sort of Three Wise Monkeys, see no evil, speak no evil, hear no evil. You could run with this idea, seeing as the Wise Monkeys concept is debated whether it refers to, as Jordan Seleskov of Symbol Sage puts it, being morally upright in the face of any evil, or to turn a blind eye to something morally or legally wrong, as if by pretending not to see the wrongdoing, they will not be held accountable for it. The reason I say this is because there is this notion that the kids are being punished by this abusive presence for not doing what they're told, thus they're somewhat trying to be good by being quiet and not misbehaving past their endless bedtime curfew. We see this when Kaylee is seen to be in the wrong, so she loses her face, and later Kevin is told to stab his eye with a knife because don't question omnipotent adult authority at any point. It reminded me of the game Among the Sleep. There's a fear of movement, a true petrified resistance to disturb the darkness, but a natural curiosity to explore, to find emotional companionship in a missing parent, or if you choose to see the presence as the father, finding the good, caring side buried deep within the darkness. They try to use television as an escapist sanctuary, but in reality it doesn't work, with the sound design alluding to the feeling that we're listening through the walls, which reminded me personally of listening to my parents fight behind closed doors. That memory is what profoundly provoked me the most. My fear wasn't of the darkness or nightmarish monsters or whatever, it was seeing my loving parents fight, to cast a shadow over a happy, safe place. I didn't truly understand it when I was young, and to God I'm grateful things worked out for us in the end, but even though parents fighting is natural, as a kid it's the most terrifying thing because those you depend on for protection and comfort are figuratively no longer there. Look, the life my parents gave me is a privilege, and I'm endlessly grateful for everything they've enabled me to do. Yet, when I think of them fighting as a kid all those years ago, I used to blame myself. I don't know why I did it, it's not that I actually did anything, there's just no feeling worse than seeing happiness disintegrate in front of you, and it's only intensified when you feel powerless to rectify it. There's a heartbreaking moment in the short film Heck, where the boy searches the entire house looking for his mother, only to be met with silence. He then says he's sorry for getting cancer, as if he feels punished for something that's not his fault. He tries to soothe it over by saying he's better now, but it doesn't bring safety or sanctuary back into his life. He's powerless to create change, and in Skinamarink that powerlessness is so felt that, at times, I truly wanted to turn the film off. One of, if not the greatest films of 2022 was Charlotte Wells' AFTERSUN, and I'm technically going to spoil it, but it's so open to interpretation that it's more about the journey than the destination, although if you want a visual opposite to Skinamarink but exceedingly more tangible and heartbreaking, AFTERSUN is surprisingly existential. I've left a timestamp if you want to skip to my final words on Skinamarink, but for everyone else, AFTERSUN tells the story of an 11-year-old girl called Sophie, who goes on vacation to Turkey with her father Callum for his 31st birthday, and what we see are essentially vignette reconstructions of Sophie's holiday based on memories captured on Callum's camcorder. However, the film uniquely subverts away from your traditional coming-of-age slice-of-life drama to draw your attention to the nuances in Callum's behaviour father, which are poignantly conveyed by Paul Mescal, who rightfully got an Oscar nomination. The movie doesn't give you answers, but the thesis of the film is to reflect upon the depression he buries deep within his soul that he hides from Sophie, who at the time isn't aware of the pain he's going through. Like Skinamarink, AFTERSUN is less about what you see and more about how you see it. There are subtle details that allude to Callum's mental illness, his stresses, his worries, his career uncertainties, his detachment from home, his crushing insecurity as a young father, his tai chi and self-help books, his utter acceptance of futility, and showing a general disregard for life. Intercut between vacation footage and Sophie's recollections is a chaotic rave scene, where Callum freely dances alone as an adult Sophie tries to reach him. Its significance is greatly open to debate, but I interpreted the rave as a representation of Callum's internal struggles, and the suffocating void of depression that consumes him, with adult Sophie essentially trying to hold on to her last memories of him and understand the complicated man that he was. When she does eventually catch up with him, instead of lovingly embracing him, she shoves him away in anger, which is given clarity in the end when adult Sophie is shown alone in her apartment watching Callum's camcorder footage, implying the events we witnessed were her attempt to remember fragments of her past, her last memory of her father being him at the airport, only for him to drop his guard when she's gone, and proceeds to enter the rave alone. It's heavily implied he committed suicide shortly after their vacation, which Sophie and in turn us as the viewers try to piece together from signs she wasn't able to see as a child. She's trying to make sense of her limited understanding and recollection of events, even ideating on his possible final moments or connecting his decision with Cleopatra, who was also said to have committed suicide. However, the unfortunate truth is that we'll just never know. Callum's a young man who fears growing old and not understanding his purpose in life. He dwells on imperfection, and a major hint is given when he walks out to the ocean alone in the dead of night after upsetting his daughter. Now, many of you are probably asking yourself, what has this got to do with Skinamarink? And well, it basically comes down to one simple, tried and true concept. It's about seeing the world through the complicated emotional lens of others, in particular children. Both films require empathy on the part of the viewer. You identify, relate, and reflect on how small fragments of imagery form together to create understanding based on emotional, moral, and even ideological perceptions. There's actually this really good book that was on my reading list when I started university called 50 Great Myths of Popular Psychology, which breaks down common misconceptions and misinformation about human behavior using research and case studies. There's a section in chapter 3 that talks about how memory is reconstructive rather than reproductive, in that while yes, we can have these emotionally vivid flashbulb memories, as they're called, most of our recollection is self-constructed based on experiences we've internalized over the course of our lives. In other words, films like Skinamarink and AFTERSUN are perfect encapsulations of how we look at ourselves and the world we've come to know. We remember based largely on how we feel. As my therapist says, there's no such thing as a negative emotion, and what films like Skinamarink do are challenge us to be vulnerable, to stop thinking we can comprehend absolutely everything. I recently finished a game called Returnal, and I didn't understand a single thing that happened in the story, so looking for an explanation somewhere, I came across a brilliant essayist called Jacob Geller, who, in his video on the game, which I've linked below, brought me back to my roots with a simple quote that reminded me of something that I keep forgetting as time has gone on. Stop conceptualizing the setting in purely literal terms. Doing so is definitely and rightfully not for everybody, and I even resist to do so when I'm just dealing with escapism, but with Skinamarink, it's sometimes better to stop seeking answers and simply question what it is to you. I'm just going to assume that made sense to someone.